Hey guys, welcome to the Notion Club. With me today is Muskego and Josh.
What
And
up?
we are back, guys, after Bigfoot. We are now going to be getting into simulation theory. And
Deep stuff.
we hope you guys will enjoy the ride today. So, yeah.
I'm going to start the conversation by asking, who believes simulation theory?
I actually do. I'm just going to put it forward on the table so nobody feels bad about answering it. I actually do think that there's a pretty solid chance that this is I think there's a better chance that it's a simulation than it's not.
Okay. How
absolutely perfect then, because I'm on the fence. And so
I'm going to say I'm on the fence as well, but I'm like more like 80% over the fence or like on the fence, I guess.
Okay.
My toes are still in the
it's not a simulation.
Well, I wouldn't say that my like 20% is not a simulation. I would say 20% is how does that work with like terrestrial life, I guess. Does that make sense?
I have thoughts on this, but
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Okay, Josh, why do you think, like, what's your percentage? I guess I need to see that.
I would say it's pretty high. Like I would say upper 80s or somewhere in the 90s. And I think that the reason is because part of, I grew up with a strong Christian background. And so I already had this ingrained idea that there was more than what was going on in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But even in my adult experiences, we've talked a ton about my psychedelic experiences, and all of that has made me feel like, okay, it doesn't diminish from the idea that there could be a higher power or a God, that we would be existing inside of some type of program. And not only that, but I also think it's a possibility that certain parts of the population are in a simulation. So it's almost like we've put ourselves into a simulation. Like if they could take over maybe a population and enslave those people, they could actually put them into an induced coma and then have them living in this dream world where, and this is getting super dark, obviously, but it's just this idea. It's kind of like the Matrix where the people are alive, but they're in a coma, and in their minds, they're all living in this sort of connected Matrix world.
That's interesting because so far, like, looking into like simulation theory, I've kind of come to the conclusion that if we are in a simulation, it's not that we're asleep, it's that like we're fully functioning, almost more like a video game, and just the reality around us is simulated, or there's like a reality that's more real than what we can perceive right now.
Yeah, so let me ask both of you guys, when we talk about the possibility of our reality being simulated, how are you guys, a digital, or is it like a spiritual? Is it how exactly are you seeing that the simulation manifests?
The most likely way that it's manifested would be digitally, like you mentioned. And that goes into some of what I've heard about the simulation theory, which is like, I think it was, I don't remember the first year, but the first year that a digital, or not a digital, but the first year that a photograph was taken, since then we've come so far in our 3D animation and video game kind of graphic technology that it's almost fully immersive. We haven't quite reached immersive virtual reality yet, but it's close. And the graphics in a lot of cases are almost indistinguishable from like a movie or real life. And so I think that in that case, it's likely that it would be digital. And a lot of people talk about like, oh, well, we don't have the computational power to actually render a simulation for the entire population to be under. And it's like, okay, well, I mean, first off, that's running metrics of like, could we run a simulation based on technology that exists inside of the simulation? So already you're limited. It's like trying to comprehend the power of God, inside of the world.
Right. And it's not even us running the simulation. It's somebody else who has untold amount of technological power.
Right.
Like,
right.
What could God possibly, what could his computer do?
Well, and if you take out the spiritual factor to this, because I think like, okay, there's a possibility too that there's a spiritual side, and we can talk about that, but just taking into consideration the digital side, like I had mentioned ago, it's a little bit dark to talk about the idea that you would be held hostage and put into an induced coma. But actually, if you research into things like MK Ultra and whatever, they were already testing hallucinogens on the population for riot control. You can look up the hallucinogen BZ, and that was a form of riot control. And what people would experience was extreme time dilation. And so
wait, sorry, what's extreme time dilation?
That's where you feel like it's like salvia, like it's a 30-minute experience, but it felt like you were there for years.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Sorry,
so with well, no, that's okay. With the BZ, what they were testing was this idea of like, okay, if we have a riot and we need to control the people, could we spray technically non-lethal hallucinogen so that the riot would be incapacitated for long enough that we could move in and, contain them. But the problem with that is that the people who were being contained were being put under this like torturous hallucinogen experience. To me, it's almost like blasting salvia into a crowd. And I got chills when I read that. And that's actually recorded history from the CIA doing tests. So you can look up BZ, and there's a full name for it. I just can't pronounce it all at the moment.
Dang, that's really interesting.
Playing into, I guess, another piece of evidence for digital. People talk, I've not done it myself, but people talk about experiencing zeros and ones when tripping on DMT.
Okay, that's really interesting.
I've heard people say that when you take a large hit or 3 large hits or whatever it takes to get there, there's a momentary like glitch in your vision where all of a sudden you see the zeros and the ones that everything's made of.
Wow. Okay.
That's really interesting. But honestly, like a lot of people do think like the universe is numbers. Like
right.
Or patterns,
equations,
like fractal patterns, repeating patterns throughout nature. Like, it may not be like the shape of a zero, but it is a shape, which is math.
It technically is, because I don't want
geometry.
I don't want to get too technical, but the 1 and the 0 only are representations of something. So a computer doesn't actually need 1 or 0. 0 means off and 1 means on, or maybe it's vice versa.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But so it's actually representing something. It's like money is representing, gold or whatever. It's a piece of paper, but behind the paper is something else. And so behind the 0 and behind the 1 is on or off. And so the universe technically does sort of operate somewhat in that capacity, in like an on or off state. But also digital computational power is extreme. Like, you think about how we may be running modern computers at whatever speed that they're able to do, graphics or Bitcoin mining or whatever else it is that's really impressive. But the technology that's being developed is so much more impressive. And so to consider that you would be able to actually like put somebody into the state of mind where they thought that they were living a real life, but actually, maybe in the outer world. And again, I'm not meaning to be overly dark, but I'm just trying to imagine this scenario. In the outer world, maybe there would be like a lab, and the person would be the patient, and they would be in an induced coma. And everyone is studying like, okay, well, what are they seeing while they're in this simulation that we're creating? And actually, I mean, that goes into, I had mentioned earlier, there's this story that I heard by a guy on YouTube named Mr. Ballin. And I'll link the exact episode. But basically, there's a story, and I don't mean to give spoilers, but I'll tell you enough about it so that you can hear it. There's a guy who is living this entire life at a university, and I think it's the University of Louisiana.
Oh
and
no.
he meets a woman there. They end up having kids. He's got a mortgage on his house or whatever, and they're getting older. And all of a sudden, this piece of furniture in his living room, which is a lamp, becomes like distorted and blurry in his vision. He can't get the lamp to become clear, but everything else in the room is clear.
Damn.
Yeah.
I actually listened to a podcast on that.
Oh, so do you know this story then? Because it's from a Reddit post.
Yeah, I heard it on something else. I can't remember what it was, but I remember hearing this story. I don't remember the conclusion though. So sorry.
Oh no, it's okay. It is from a Reddit post, and so if you've heard about it before or from there, I'll try to link that Reddit post too, because it's where the person actually posts like, "Hey, this happened to me, and I don't know how to explain it, and like I still am messed up from it." But basically, what ends up happening is that the lamp remains blurry, and it eventually expands and keeps expanding and gets bigger and bigger, and all of a sudden, the guy snaps awake, and he's in a police car. And the police and he's like, "Where is my wife?" And the officer is like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And the guy's just freaking out, and he's like, "Where is my wife? I need to talk to her." And through some, turn of events, the officer basically says, "Look, you just got he was crossing the street, and somebody either hit him with a car or hit him with a bike or punched him, or some unexpected weird thing happened where he got hit while he was crossing a street, and he fell unconscious. And the police officer came and picked him up while he was unconscious and was driving him to the hospital. And in that period of time, he woke up in the police car, having just lived this huge life."
Wow.
Jeez.
As you're talking about that, that almost brings to mind deja vu. Not like it's not directly correlated, but within the simulation theory, like deja vu would make a lot of sense.
Right.
Like having experienced or seen something before.
Yeah, what the hell is
that? It could
that?
be a glitch or like almost like a do-over almost. I don't know, like, but I don't know. I feel like that would coincide with the simulation theory really well. The experience of deja vu.
Yeah,
that's an interesting point to bring up. That's they somehow that feels like related. It's the cousin of Mandela effect.
Yes, yeah.
They're like directly related somehow.
Do either of you experience deja vus ever?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, can I ask you a question about them? Are they things where it's like, whoa, and I don't mean for this to be a leading question, so if it's not either of these things, fine. But is it like, whoa, this is a brand new thing, but I feel like I've felt it before? Or is it like very distinct, like I remember when I had this dream and now I'm in this moment? Is it either of those?
The second.
It's more like the second.
That's
for
so
me,
scary.
It gives me a very dark feeling. Yeah, like, wait a second, why?
I don't think I get a dark feeling. I think it's always like, I've been here before. I remember this. I remember it perfectly. I can tell you the outcome to this.
Oh,
like, that's how it feels.
I literally have goosebumps right now hearing you guys talk about that. No joke. It's so, because it feels real.
It's really odd though, because I think just about everybody gets deja vu.
But nobody can explain it.
And
it's like dreams. Nobody can explain dreams.
Not everybody is aware of what Mandela effect is, but when you explain it and you ask the certain test questions, everybody suddenly goes, "Oh, gee, wait a second, that is real, isn't it?"
Yeah.
It was the Berenstain Bears, but it's not. It's the Bernstein Bears or something. Like, it's everybody gets the Mandela effect as well as deja vu, and like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
Right. And the Mandela effect is super creepy, because I have my own personal list of things where it's like, I actually think that the Mandela effect is another thing that's real. Like, if we're talking, do you believe in simulation theory? Then it's like, lump it on top. I also believe in the Mandela effect.
Yeah. Wait, okay. So, Josh, have you experienced deja vu? Sorry, I'm still on that.
Yeah, no, I have. And the creepy thing for me is that deja vus are really visual, and I'll have dreams that I can remember, and then way later on, like even years later, I'll find myself in a moment, and it lasts for like 2 or 3 seconds where I'm like, I'm fully aware of this moment. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily like I can see further past it, or I can see what it does. It's not like it means something. It's
Mm-hmm.
just like I literally have dreamt these 2 or 3 minutes before, and
Oh,
now I'm
so
living it.
Wow. So
so
it's
you're
it's
dreaming it. It's not like happening in real time then.
Well, no, I mean like I'll have a dream, but then years later in real time, I'll find myself in that place that I was
yeah,
in my
I see what you're
dream.
saying. I don't know if I've ever
Oh,
had that.
I feel like okay, so with that in mind, I've had like deja vu where it's real time, and I've just started like saying it out loud just so that like other people. I also started taking notes. Um
Nice.
I started taking uh like a catalog of the deja vu moments, and now it's gone. Like I it's probably like a glitch in my phone, but I
That's
can't
Mandela
find
effect
it.
stuff.
I can't find it. And I mean that's easily explained away, I guess, for someone who's like eh. But to me it's like I remember writing this list and it's gone now. So
Hmm.
where am I, what version of reality am I going to find it again? But with the dreaming thing, I have had dreams where like I've seen something in the future, but I just thought it was like ooh, futuristic, like
Hmm.
scenes almost. I've never
Hmm.
considered it to be like deja vu, like you're chalking it up to be. So that's interesting.
It definitely feels like a deja vu. Deja vus are a weird aspect, and I do think, like you said earlier, that they could play into the whole simulation theory.
Yeah,
Like it
really
would kind of
well.
explain them.
Yes, yeah. Like I wonder.
So I mean, is that like a glitch in the alien's computer then?
Oh, that's interesting. I've literally never even considered that that type of technology could have like some weird glitch stuff.
Hmm.
Oh, speaking of that, okay. So this is something that I thought we would cover later, but I feel like this is the perfect time to talk about it.
Yeah, dive
Um,
in.
so I was reading this article. I'll link it. I think it's like from Science Direct or something like that. But could dreams also help prove the consistency of the simulation as well? Because um, there's a lot of dreams that for no reason people have. There's like dream archetypes almost, like you always see like someone chasing you, you're always falling, you're always like
Yeah.
flying, those kinds of
Yeah.
things. And in this article, they talked about how it could be an offline model of the world. So, like,
Hmm.
the simulation is like hibernating or offline. Like, you turn your computer off and everything just kind of waits. If that's what dreams could be, like, half of us in the simulator reality are like sleeping, we're offline. And that's the glitch in the simulation necessarily. So like when we see something like maybe sleep paralysis, when we see something standing over us, is that like something outside of the simulation? I don't know.
Wow.
Do you guys
That
see what I'm saying? Does
yeah,
that
like
make
there's an
sense?
overlay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It makes it feel like the mind would have to go into like a resting place
Mm-hmm.
almost. But to be honest, that's just like another dimension. It's like, okay, well, the mind clicks into another dimension. And it's like, well, if
Mm-hmm.
the waking mind is a simulation and the
Mm-hmm.
dream mind, is just another dimension, well, isn't that just as real of a simulation?
Yeah, actually, yes,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Right.
But something they also brought up in the article was that dreams actually could be really practical if we are in a simulation because it's teaching us threat coping skills
Hmm.
and how to be aware of like danger. So like when you have like a scary dream, like or say something's chasing you within a dream, it's teaching your body to react if that were to happen in your waking state, in your awake state. Like okay, if something's chasing you, what do? You run, like so they were talking about how like dreaming could be a great way to help us um calculate risks and hazards. But I don't know. I feel like that also really ties into simulation theory. I mean, I don't know how to fully like talk about that, but it's a thought. It's a notion.
To me, like when I think about simulation theory, I love thinking about what's called the hard problem in consciousness, which is what exactly is consciousness. Like us as conscious beings have to contemplate what consciousness is and Jung believed that, like as you're saying, Mariah, there or maybe it was Josh that said this. There's like two realms, like when you're asleep and when you're awake, which Jung called the when you're asleep, you are making contact with the collective unconscious. That's like all consciousness pooled together. And then when we're awake, we're in our ego, our individual waking conscious. And everybody's got like a foot in both. And you make contact when you go to sleep with the unconscious. And then you do what with that here in the real world, if you will. But we kind of do have contact with both worlds of consciousness. The collective unconscious and then like our own consciousness. But if we could nail down what consciousness is and where it comes from, it totally, like, the reason why I'm open to simulation theory is because that like it allows the, what am I trying to say? I'm just babbling at this point. They seem like they could be compatible, I think.
Well, I think what you're bringing up kind of is bringing forth the idea of the simulation theory being a spiritual thing, and not spiritual in the sense that it's, you know, defined by any of the religions that we know about, but spiritual in the sense of like, how are we all connected? And is there a space that we're all connected in? And do we have access to that space? Is it in the dream world? Is it when we take psychedelics? Like, when do we access this connected space? And I actually believe personally, I love Jung and what he teaches, but in my personal experience of why I initially even heard about the simulation theory came from the painting The Net of Being. And what you're talking about with the collective conscious reminds me of the Net of Being painting. Have you guys ever seen that? It's Alex Gray.
Yeah, I think you actually sent that to us once.
Okay, so the Net of Being, it's to explain it, it's these faces, and it's on the pillars, a face facing each side, north, south, east, and west. And that's the collective consciousness. That's the whole like pool of everyone's consciousness.
Yeah.
And there's a music video that kind of represents what what is happening in the Net of Being, and it's Vicarious by Tool. But what they get into there is this idea of like, you as an individual being can jump in to the Net of Being through your pool of consciousness, you know, like your access point, and you can jump into other people's Net of Being, if you will.
What? Really?
Yeah, so it's bringing, and that's my interpretation. So, you know, Tool people or Alex Gray or whatever may hear that and be like, that's way off. But it's my interpretation of what I've seen from it. And it represents the idea to me that we're all connected in some way. And I actually think more from, like, I talked about the idea that the simulation theory could be a digital realm, which I believe is possible. But I think actually the spiritual simulation is more likely.
Okay.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Well, because like, okay, you know, there's this possibility because of our own history where like you could enslave a population and put them under a hallucinogen and they would all be living a, you know, weird life. That's fine. But in our own reality, like, we're all really here. And if you are able to take one of these substances, like if you take mushrooms or if you take LSD or any of these other popular hallucinogens, what happens is you feel hugely connected to everybody. You feel this like universal sense of oneness where it's not like we're all family or whatever else like that. It's like we're all a singular unit connected together.
Cut from the same cloth.
Right.
We are. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that experience to me is way more of a spiritual internal thing of like, okay,
I
this
see what
is
you're
bigger.
saying. Yeah.
Yeah, we really are all connected, and it feels that way. And it feels that way when we're dreaming, and it feels that way in, like, let's say if you go to a big concert, like a musical experience, everyone who's there, who's singing along, you feel connected and you feel this like oneness. That's where I think we could be in this, and it would be a simulation. And what I mean by that, okay, so to give you sort of like a hypothesis, one time I had this idea of like, what if there was only God and then one other being in the universe? But to make it fun and interesting, he split the being into a billion different pieces or whatever. I mean, more than a billion, but a billion different pieces, and made them all individual lives, and made a world and made animals and all this stuff just for, the sake of, because it's God. And now we're all living, but in actuality, we're not all individual consciousness is walking around. We're really this one singular being, and it's just God and one being.
Hive consciousness, maybe.
Right. And that I don't think is a real, like, really what it is, but it was just this sort of way to imagine, like, what if we really all were one kind of thing.
Interesting. And so I'm wondering about free will with that, if we do have free will. Muskego.
That's
Muskego.
your realm. If you listen to Sam Harris and stuff,
Okay, I'm just gonna put this forward as a disclaimer for Muskego's sake. If we do have free will, do you think that could lend itself to being split up, this like ultimate being splitting itself into like all of these like microorganisms? Do you think that is where the free will could come from, or do you think ultimately it would still be the free will of the initial being? Does that make sense? Does that question make sense?
I think it makes sense, yes.
Okay, so like what do you think would be more likely? Okay, say we're riding on this hypothesis where it's like one being that split itself up. Do you think it would be more credible for free will to exist because that one being has free will, and ultimately because we're micro parts of that, we also in turn have free will? Or do you think it's more likely that...
Here's where I think the debate of free will in general gets sticky, is what exactly are we talking about when we say free will? Are you saying just like in everyday life choices of choosing chocolate or vanilla ice cream, or are you saying like where you wind up in life? You know what I'm saying?
I would say the ability to choose and the ability to think. That's what I consider free will.
Yeah. See, I would consider hive consciousness to be more leaning toward not having free will.
Okay.
If you're...
What do you think, Josh? Oh, sorry.
No. Go ahead, Josh. What's your opinion?
Well,
settle the debate.
It's your answer. This is it.
I like exactly where both of you were just taking it. So all of a sudden this was just like, I just sat down and felt like I was in a university. It was awesome. It was awesome. Like a university, like one of those cool lectures you would try to attend.
And both Muskego and I are opposing
up to debate
forces.
The professor.
Yeah, I just got taken aback. Sucked in. No, but Muskego, you raised a point like, well, how do you define free will? And it's like, okay. Mm-hmm. You do have to nail that down. And so how I would nail that down, and this doesn't make it how it is, but how I would nail free will down is like anything that can be done by anyone or anything in the world. So like, okay, what I mean by that is, let's say you are a dog and you have teeth and you can bite someone, then that exists as something that is within your free will. Or you have 4 legs, so you can run, and maybe you can jump over a fence, and you could decide to do that. So that exists within your free will. Okay. So then jumping over to people, what is our free will? Our free will could be, like you said, like chocolate or vanilla ice cream. Where do I want to go to school? Do I want to build something, or do I want to tear something down? And so free will, I would define as anything that can be done by anything that is alive. Now, we put our own rules over that, which I think is appropriate. Like, you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't kill, you shouldn't lie, you shouldn't, this and that, which I think is appropriate. But if you just step out to like, what can people or things do? Okay. So to me, it doesn't take away from the idea that everyone would have free will still, because if you take that concept, then it's like, okay, I don't mean to jump over to another topic and make this overly, mixed up. But if you consider that in the musical realm, there's only 8 notes in an octave. Every single instrument that plays 8 notes and then a variation of a major or minor of those notes, but it's all contained within 8 notes. Every various instrument plays those 8 notes differently. Like a guitar plays them on strings, a piano hits the strings. Everything is playing those 8 notes in their own way, but they're contained to that action set.
I see what you're saying.
Right.
Okay.
So each instrument has its own free will to play any variation of those notes.
Set by its prerequisites of what it is.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So right. We're only free to do what we're actually able to, and not only that, but what we think of doing.
Right.
So we can't ascend past the realm of like our chemical makeup, but that is still free will within itself. Like, not in itself, but basically like we're bound to our our terrestrial beings or our spiritual beings, but we still have choices within that. We can still choose to turn left or to turn right.
Right. See,
is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I see. To me, that isn't really free will. If we're only free to make choices that only like come to our minds that we're able to do, is it really free will when it's confined to your specific genes and circumstances?
Dude, that just gave me the chills twice. Man, that's a thinker, dude. No, for real.
But what could be outside of those limitations? What could be outside of that boundary?
Well,
that would be free will. What would be considered free will then?
No limits.
No limits.
We would have all possibilities of ideas to come to mind, and we would be able to choose what comes to mind. We'd be able to choose, where we're born, who we're born to, what kind of friends we have, who our family is.
Interesting.
So you wouldn't have this like dumb brain fog of like, what am I going to have for dinner tonight? It's like, I know all the options and this is the decision, and I have the free will to decide. I
kind of have this belief that I could be you and you could be me. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you had been born in my body to my parents at my birth date, we would probably have pretty much the same outcome in life. If you had my genes, the same thought processes that I have, if all the circumstances were duplicated to be mine, we could swap places.
Yeah, I agree with that
fundamental belief.
So what about like ascending to goop? Like, what if I didn't want to be a person, but I wanted to like turn into goop? Like, would that be what you're saying as well? Is that a possibility?
I mean, I don't know.
I'm just asking.
So that's just a facetious argument.
I don't know what facetious means, so I don't know what you're
I can only barely say it.
About.
No, that's a good question. Do we only have free will if we could like something that they're not capable of?
Yeah.
I guess if you want to put it that way, then sure.
Okay. But also, that's kind of scary to think about. Like, think about all of the choices that I think I would like have a anxiety attack more than I do.
Well, but okay. We need to nail down some root definitions of what we're talking about.
Like, I'm still thinking
sorry, guys. I also didn't mean to derail us into a debate about free will when we're supposed to be talking about the simulation.
Well, no, free will plays heavy into the simulation.
They kind of are important to each other.
And I don't think you guys are off in what you're talking about, but it's more of like, do I have the capacity to make any decision that I want? And it's like, okay, well, hang on. Are you in charge of the simulation? I don't know. But if you just break apart the two words that we're talking about, free will, kind of easy to work with, but the will part, I think the will is more of a meaning of like, okay, I will do this. And what is in your ability to do that? So like, I will climb up this mountain today. It's like, okay, you can do that. And if it's like, I will pick up this car, it's like, okay, well, you are not going to do that. And so, but it's not outside of your free will to decide that you're going to try it and then try it. That's outside of your capability, but it wasn't outside of your free will to, go try to do it.
But if we're goop, we could try.
Are you talking like lumpy space princess?
Yeah. No, I'm just talking about like lumpy things.
I was picturing Gumby.
Gumby.
I was picturing like Flubber,
Flubber. Okay.
Oh man. All throwbacks.
Right?
See, I see what you're saying, Josh, though, about like the difference between just capability and what was it, desire?
Capability,
essentially,
and desire.
But
that's
like
a great point.
I think that just to push my argument even further here, we, at least speaking for myself, I oftentimes really want to change my behavior, but I just can't. I want to be something that I can't. Not only that, but there are some easy, just physical capabilities that I have that for some reason I just can't. Like hitting a free throw. I'm perfectly capable of hitting a free throw, but I miss 50% of them when I try my very best to do it.
Now, there are certain things that take dedication, like when you now are in, and I'm not trying to like make you feel bashful or anything, but you're, in my opinion, a very talented musician.
Oh, well, thank you, sir.
Well, and so you wouldn't have picked up an instrument and immediately been able to play, but through serious dedication and, in my opinion, the will to make it happen, you are now able to do it. And so it's like, okay, well, going to the free throw, if you had the will and you were out there with the dedication too, do you think you could probably be making free throws consistently after like a week?
Yeah, I'd be making them consistently, but even Kobe Bryant missed free throws.
Yeah, that's fair.
Even Eric Clapton will hit a sour note. Like it.
Yep.
Even though these things are all within our capability and we've done these things before, we sometimes stumble or we don't have the control that we wish that we had.
Well, I will just say that I think that sometimes, like a lot, if you watch people on YouTube, you only see perfect edited videos or Instagram or whatever. But if you go see a performance, if you go see the game, you'll see Kobe or you'll see Clapton mess up. And that moment is, I think, what connects people to those, stars or whatever. Because it's like, wow, I actually
Yeah.
saw them mess up, and they're really a human. So
Right.
that's just a little tangent, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I'll get off my my high horse here. So I'll be completely honest with you guys. For all the talk that I do about how much I don't believe in free will, I would say, like, when I'm not really thinking about it, I do believe in it. Just in everyday moments of life, I think we all treat each other like we have free will, you know? And at the end of the day, that may be the only thing that's really important.
I think that that's an appropriate way to do it, because at that point you're questioning what is going on, and you're actually trying to have an open mind about what the possibilities are.
Oh, can you not hear me?
Nope.
Oh, there you are.
Hi, Mariah.
Oh, I had my mic off on accident.
Oh, it's all good.
My dogs were barking in the background, and I turned it off, but I was speaking the whole time, so...
Oh, sorry.
Oh, well, what did
we
you
were just
say?
ignoring you?
Well, I was just going to bring up willpower, but it's gone now.
Well, no, it's not gone. What do you mean willpower?
Come on, demonstrate your free will here, Mariah. Bring it back.
I want to know about willpower.
Well, it was what Muskego had said it before, but I forgot it because I have a teeny tiny brain and attention span. He brought up a question and said something, and I was like, well, isn't that just willpower? And then something, and then Josh, like, I don't know. It's gone.
Did it have to do with hitting free throws, or was it the...
No, it was before that.
Oh, okay. Was it talking about, like, me wanting to change myself? Like,
yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, I was like, well, isn't that just willpower? Not that you can't.
Here's the thing. Like, when it comes to changing, like, you know, perpetual behaviors, behavior patterns, or even, you know, addictions, like, I can want and will myself all I want in a moment. But the reality is, no matter how much I want to change, I'm still going to stumble. It takes a lot of course correcting and persistent course correcting before you actually start changing the behavior. Even though you want to, and you want to real bad initially, it takes time still.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I had more, but I forgot.
Oh, okay. Well, if it comes back to you, though.
Yeah. I'll just randomly blurt it out in the middle of some other conversation. I'll text you guys. Yes, exactly. Oh, maybe the simulation will allow me to go back. Maybe the ancient fathers of our or mothers, will allow me to. I'm just kidding. I don't even know where I'm going with this.
Pierce through the veil sometime around Halloween.
Yeah. Oh, yes, Samhain. Hell yeah. You know what? Everything relates back to itself, guys. Samhain, Deja Vu, Mandela effect. It's all because of the simulation.
That is synchronicity. You're right.
Yes.
There we go. Oh my god.
And sacred geometry is synchronicity ultimately. Like, okay, sorry.
Yeah, that's actually true. That's
So I have a question for you guys. Who or what is running the simulation?
Ooh, that's a good one.
And why?
Dang.
So, did you guys look up Nick Bostrom, who proposed the simulation theory?
Yeah, a while ago.
When we initially tried to do
Yes.
And I had a meltdown.
I wasn't going to say that. I was just going to say when we had our first conversation about simulation
If we aren't
theory.
honest, what are we? No. Just kidding. I don't know. I'm the clown of the show.
No.
In Nick Bostrom's paper back in 2003, his paper was called "Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?" And there's 3 propositions that he brings up, and the first one is the human species is very likely to go extinct before we reach a post-human stage where we could potentially create a simulation and run it and be past like our human self as it is. And then the second proposition is any post-human civilization is extremely unlikely to run a significant number of simulations for their evolutionary history. So basically, like they're most likely, even if they can, they're most likely not going to. And then proposition 3 is we're almost certainly living in a computer simulation, and it follows that the belief there is there is a significant chance that we will one day become post-humans who run ancestor simulations. So basically, like in the third proposition, he says that yes, we're definitely living in a simulation, and it's our ancestors or post-humans that are currently running our simulation, and at some point we'll achieve what they've achieved and will be the ancestors in future generations.
Is he basically describing that Rick and Morty, where
exactly,
he has a universe inside his spaceship, so that
making
spaceship
the
runs right, and then they have a simulated world to run their shit. Like, is that what
it's
he's
like
saying
Inception.
In proposition 3 here? Yeah, exactly.
Yes, essentially. So obviously, like okay, say that right now we are able to create a simulation with autonomous, or I mean within the boundaries of that simulation, autonomous beings. There's a guy who brings up what's his name? Well, let me get to it. It's somewhere. Oh, I lost it. George Holtz. Have you guys heard of him at all?
The name sounds familiar, but I don't know.
He's insane. Actually, we can come back to him. He's really funny. He's actually kind of funny. But basically, like, he says that like we are essentially Mario and Super Bros, and at some point we'll break out of the simulation. So basically, like, say we were to create Super Bros, and eventually, like, we'll ascend past, and then we'll create another Super Bros 2, and with Mario's running around inside of it, right? And so that's what the third proposition is. Yes, we'll ascend, and then we'll be the ancestors. So it'll just continue running and running and running, just like in that Rick and Morty skit, actually. And it's actually also interesting because did you guys know that we're like, our universe is in a bubble?
No. What do you mean?
So there's this thing called, what is it called? It's like a super bubble. Oh, it's called a local bubble. So our universe and our sun is actually almost directly in the center of the universe. There's like these layers to... there's like what's called the heliopause and the heliosphere. And within those like bubbled layers, like our gravity runs and everything. So like our planetary system, our sun is at the center, planets on the rim, and then it continues to grow out like past galaxies, and everything is held inside of our universe by this like bubble. And so I think it lends itself some like simulation theory credibility, that like there could be multiple universes out there all within these bubbles, kind of protected from another universe almost, or anything surrounding it. But it's interesting because that led me to think about like a drop of water under a microscope, seeing all of these microorganisms running around. Like, we don't know if they're like, you know, intelligent or free thinking or, you know, whatever. But there is life within that drop of water. It just kind of made me think, like, you know, what if our universe is like a pond? Or I always bring it back to C.S. Lewis, but in his book, The Magician's Nephew, there's these scenes where I forget their names now, but there's two children that run around, and there's this wood between the worlds, and they're able to jump from pond to pond. Yeah, to pool to pool.
Such a good book.
Yeah. And so it just kind of had me thinking like, well, in a drop of water, there's life. That could be a simulation of reality. Our planet, there's life on this planet, but it's not all encompassing of life. And then we have our galaxy and then our universe. And within all of that, I don't know, it's just crazy. And I was watching this one video, which we can link actually. But somebody said on there, and it kind of like, it caught my attention, and I thought it would be kind of fun to talk about it. Someone said a universe that is a cell to a larger celestial being, and so on and so on. Also thinking, let me rephrase. Let me back up. So here's the question: if our universe is a living cell inside of, let's say, a celestial being, like what's outside? Like, is the celestial being all encompassing, and then all of these little like microorganisms running inside? And so like our universe, I don't know how I'm explaining this. This sounds terrible.
No, I get you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm following you.
Okay, so basically like our universe is a living cell inside of a celestial being, right? That's what we'll say for right now. And, obviously it goes down and goes down. It's just like sacred geometry, all these like fractals that follow each other in repeating patterns. And then someone said, okay, so it's going to be hard to read because I don't think they wrote it out and I didn't like paraphrase, but it says, the universe is expanding. So the celestial being, let's say that, is growing bigger and bigger. And then it says a universe that is a cell to a larger celestial being, and so on and so on. Also thinking about how we're constantly discovering smaller and smaller forms of matter that also seem to be infinite. And then they bring up sacred geometry, and then how the structure of a cell is quite similar to the structure of a galaxy, etc. So it just kind of got me thinking like of all these different like strings that, throughout like the Notion Club, just continually wrap all together. And I don't know, I don't know where I was going with that, but I think it goes really well within the Proposition 3 by Nick Bostrom. So
I think everything you just said sounds like the closest thing that the simulation theory would be out of any of the stuff talked about so far.
Yeah, and I think it would make a lot of sense in regards to physicality, spirituality, and I don't know. It seems to fit really well. And I also saw a scientist say, because they were talking about the possibility of like, okay, how could we harness enough power to run a simulation? And there's this thing called the Dyson Sphere. Basically, what we would do is we would harness the power of our local sun, our local star. And there would be all of these like spheres around, and the closest you get to the sun, the power that's coming from that, the heat, and it runs off of the heat, but the farther you get out from it, it just turns into like power. It's not going to like burn us like close to Earth or whatever. But basically like a lot of people say like, oh, we'd have to harness the power of the sun, and that's why his proposition number 2 says like, oh, humanity will die out before we can even reach that possibility. But there's been other people that have said, well, maybe the galaxy or our universe is the computational computer. Maybe we don't need the power of our sun, but the universe itself is the computer lending. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I don't know, just really interesting stuff. I really feel like this is a really like high possibility.
I love that you brought up that C.S. Lewis book. That is such a good book.
I know, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
I always go back to it. Like C.S. Lewis, both in his space trilogy and in the Chronicles of Narnia, like there's just so much in it that just makes you think like outside of just like everyday terrestrial life. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the spiritual side of what's going on outside of our reality, I guess.
Yeah, and the pools is just, it's a great picture. Obviously like we don't know if we're in a pool within the the wood between all of the worlds. But like, it's a great picture to kind of play with, I think.
That sort of represents like what the net of being is, though. That image of all the faces is
Yeah.
like that pool where you go there and there's all the different pools that you can jump into. That's what the
Yes.
net of being is supposed to represent.
Wow. Dude, this is so cool. And I know you have sent this picture, but I've been staring at it this whole time we've been talking, and it's kind of blowing my mind. There's like so many, there's infinite possibilities within this picture. It's crazy.
It's definitely one of my favorites, but I think you're right on with what you're talking about. And I like I said, with it being probably the closest thing to what the simulation actually is, it goes into the idea of like multiple dimensions being connected, how the higher level would be connected to the lower level, which I think is like how, if you ever listen to string theory or whatever else, dimensional, multi-dimensional people talking, they think about like, okay, well, there's the fifth dimension, fourth dimension, third dimension, and then we see from the third dimension down.
Yeah.
But we can't see the fourth dimension up.
Holy crap, dude. Oh my God. Yes.
Well, but that plays into the idea of like, okay, so we don't know. Science is always changing, but at the moment, they believe that all matter is made up of atoms and all this different stuff, molecules or whatever. And so within, what looks to be a solid space, like maybe a chunk of wood, you would see that as being solid. It's actually some countless numbers of molecules. When you look out into the stars, you see all these billions of different stars. And so it's almost this like as above, so below idea where when you were talking, this is probably way off, but I'm thinking like, okay, if we were in a bubble, the universe in a bubble, is it something significant? Like maybe in a lab, they dropped a bubble onto a petri dish and they're looking at it and that's our universe? Or is it something like we're the molecule in the knee of some child, and as they grow up and become an adult, our universe is expanding because they're expanding?
Yeah.
And it's like we're experiencing life at this dimension, but they're a true being in their dimension.
Yeah.
That's, I think, far-fetched. I'm just being imaginative.
No, but like that.
So, question: when you're conceiving of simulation, is the Big Bang Theory in it?
No. To me, here's the thing. I wanted to put a lot of stock into the Big Bang Theory just because I became more scientifically minded, I suppose you might say, as I got older. But the problem is that like I've talked about so many times in the past, my psychedelic experiences have been so profound and so much more real feeling than my real life, where that's where I would say I feel like I was outside of the simulation for a minute.
Yes.
And the people who are the leading minds of the Big Bang or whatever, like I was just watching a video with Richard Dawkins talking to Joe Rogan, and it's an older one, not too old, but it's a little bit back. And Joe Rogan, of course, said, hey, have you done psychedelics? And Richard Dawkins, who is one of the leading people in the, Big Bang or evolutionary field at the moment, said that he had never taken psychedelics because he was afraid of a bad trip.
Yep.
If the simulation were to be a thing, I think it would be like really, I think it would be like close to impossible for the Big Bang to take place. I think that you need some form of a creators to create a simulation, right? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. So I have another question in addition to my question. Mariah, so do you think that simulation would just be a repackaging of the 6-day creation story? Or it could be.
Wait, could you say that in a different way?
So, in theory, in simulation, you have a simulator.
Okay.
We could just call simulator God, and then just from there I go with Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Not to say that there was absolutely nothing anywhere. It just means this dimension didn't exist.
Yeah.
And then God, simulator, creates a simulation. To us characters, the illusion is reality itself, but the simulator or God is somewhere else clicking around on a computer.
Okay.
Wait, so what's the question?
Sorry. Are you like, because Josh was saying he does not really see a Big Bang in his simulation theory, but for you, you're saying like, well, there could be a Big Bang in a simulation, and a lot of people try to reconcile the creation story with the Big Bang and say that like God made the Big Bang.
Yeah. Oh, so you're asking like, does the simulation theory fit with like the 7-day archetypical like creation story?
Right.
Okay.
Like, is that how you're kind of conceiving of this?
I think I try to think of that and other possibilities, but with my like, I don't know, like with believing in a creator, a God, I think that it would make a lot of sense if like that were to answer. I don't know though. Okay, so here's where I'm kind of confounded with the 7-day narrative. I don't 7 days, one day at a time, like 24-hour period is like very short to come up with stuff. Like some of the things that we see. So I don't necessarily know if like 7 days is 7, sets of 24-hour periods, or if it means something else in the mind of the Hebrew like narrators. Sure. But I do think it lends credibility to the simulation theory. Like if it would make sense, I think it would make things easier in my mind if the world was created in 7 days. It would be so much easier to think of it as more of like a computer program, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know if that it answers your question, though.
Well, I don't even know if there is an answer to my question.
I think, though, with the simulation theory, yes, like I do think that if we are in a simulation, then there is definitely a creator. And I mean, the human side of like the biblical text, like, I don't know. I think it coincides pretty well with the idea of the simulation theory.
I agree. I think that the simulation theory ties into a lot of different spiritual beliefs.
I think I even was reading Hinduism actually is a really good candidate for the conceivability of this theory. I didn't research a whole lot of it, but somebody had mentioned like, oh, Hinduism like falls in line, but I don't know a lot about Hinduism, so I wouldn't be able to speak on that.
Yeah. I wish I did, but I don't either.
No, that would be interesting to look into, though.
Yeah, and how that coincides. But I mean, Christianity, I think, works pretty well with the idea of simulation theory. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. What's your follow-up question, though?
Okay, so I thought to bring this up because Josh, you were mentioning that like for a time in your life you were trying to go more scientific,
right?
Mainstream science.
Yep.
And I would say that I've kind of probably walked a very similar journey or path as you have. Like for a long time, I was brought up in a conservative Christian church, taught 7-day creationism, and then as I kind of went out, started trying to just educate the secular worldview was, and try to accept science and go along with the popular narrative that science is the established way we should be thinking. And
right.
Then I kind of, so I think at some point, all three of, I don't want to make assumptions here, but the way all three of us were raised, can I assume that like we've all heard a 6-day literal creationist use a procreation belief argument that you have faith in the Bible, or number two, you have faith in scientists. Meaning,
It's too black and white.
For everyone, quantum scientist, for everyone that isn't a physicist, everyone that isn't a professional scientific researcher, supposed to know what the scientists are saying. We're just kind of taking them we're having faith in them, right? So we're choosing faith in one thing or another, unless if you are a scientist, and then you get to understand it. Long answer to this, but the question was just simply like, what are we supposed to believe? Like, are we supposed to have faith in the scientists in the same way that we used to have faith in the Bible? Or are we supposed to just kind of feel it out? Like, maybe I'm wrong, but I kind of do feel like society at large puts pressure on people to believe scientists. And if you say you don't, you're like anti-science, and it's kind of a belittling position to hold. And so I don't want the Notion Club to be known as a anti-science podcast here, but you kind of find myself not believing everything that a scientist has to say.
Don't say that. No,
actually, most scientists probably are on board with simulation theory, but I might be wrong about that as well. But certainly, I think the main scientific point is still Big Bang. But I myself have issues with conceiving of a Big Bang. I 100%.
I feel like both of these positions, though, like, you either have to take a like in the circles that we grew up in, you have to take either a creationist view or a science view, and you couldn't take the other, or you couldn't dabble in both. And I don't know, I feel like there's not enough gray area or grace in
you're probably right about
dabbling in both.
We don't have to choose. We can just window shop all of them.
Yeah, and maybe not even just window shop, but I mean, like, why can't we take theories and think about them and consider the possibilities and how they mesh together or how they don't mesh together? Like, I don't know. I feel like the older I get, I'm starting to not like black or white thinking, where there's just this like opposing arguments where it's like, because like, okay, think about this, like, you have a friend and you both have your own little worlds that you're involved with, and something happens. Say you miss a deadline together, like, oh, we were supposed to talk at 3 p.m. today and you missed the call. And it's not because you're a bad friend, or, you know, something might have come up. There's differences in the narrative, you know, and you just have to talk about, like, okay, well, the reason I missed the 3 p.m. deadline was because my dog ran out and I had to go check it, or, you know, run down the road and catch it. And, you know, here's all these other like things that came up. And then, oh, why did you forget? Well, you know, I thought about it, but I just didn't call. Like, there's just, I don't know. I feel like there's answers in all arguments. And I don't know why it has to be like black or white, I guess.
I like that answer. Yeah.
I agree. I used to think of science as being very set in stone, like, oh, this is what, you know, the facts are. But now I think of science as being something where it's like, this is what people believe right now with as much data as they've been able to come up with.
Yeah.
And I believe in the scientists who come forward and say, like, here's what I believe based on the data that I have, and here's the data that I'm working with.
Yeah, but you're continuing to learn. Like, this isn't like absolute, like, set in stone. This isn't an absolute possibility. It's a possibility.
Benchmark with maybe some wiggle room.
Yeah.
Well, even if you take the model in chemistry that they use of the atom, they look at multiple different models, because at one point they thought that the atom looked like this, and then at another point they thought it looked like that. So now they talk about both examples.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a case of science evolving.
Yeah.
Even our culture has evolved in a lot of ways, with like cannabis laws and stuff like that changing, where now that we actually have data that we can look at, people are making new types of decisions.
Or even that study where, I forget what it's called, but people like back in like early history, they thought that like you could predetermine how someone was going to act based on the shape of their skull. Like we know that's not the case.
Yeah.
We I mean, look at like race theory. Like people in the past thought that if you were black, then like you didn't have the same capacity as a white man to think or to reason, or a woman even, like me as a woman, because I bleed, because the blood rushes out of me once a month or whatever, that I do not have as much computational power in my brain as a man does, because the blood's going out of me. So like I'm not as smart, or I'm not as capable as a man to think of possibilities.
It's like medieval times too, where they thought something was magic when in reality it was just science that they hadn't yet discovered.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know.
That's a good point.
I actually do feel though like there's a correlation between science and spirituality, in the sense of like, I don't mean to go too much off the deep end here, but I don't think of the Bible as being, like a set of instructions or whatever. A lot of people who look at Christianity or Catholicism or whatever biblical style of religion, and they'll say like, oh, well, that book is outdated, or that's a set of rules from an angry God or whatever. And it's like, I don't look at it as being a set of rules, because, they don't have iPhones in the Bible. They don't have cars or, any of the systems that we have. So how could it be a relevant set of rules? But what I think about it as being, and there was an old author, gosh, I think it was Rob Bell, who talked about this idea. Maybe it's not, and I might be getting that totally wrong, but it's this idea that the Bible is not supposed to be a set of instructions as much as it's just recorded history of what people were going through at that time.
Yeah.
It's just a record. Yeah,
it's a record.
Yeah.
And so what I've been trying to get at with this whole like tying together the correlation between my belief that there's psychedelic use in the Bible and why that's important for us, is because if you set aside the idea that the Bible is a set of rules, and you're like, okay, fine, it's not a set of rules. What are we looking at here? What you see is human beings who are moving through, acting just like we act today, no different than we act today, but having these profound, unexplainable experiences. And I'm not talking about the miracles where people are healed, but I'm talking about the visions like Ezekiel or Book of Enoch stuff, or Moses seeing the burning bush, that kind of stuff, where it's like, or even the high priest going into the tabernacle, going into the Ark of the Covenant and breathing in the smoke, seeing the table of the showbread. All that stuff is correlated to being like, okay, well, why is that in the Bible? If it's not a set of instructions and we're looking at the history of humanity, then is that something that we have access to as well? And that's where I think that the psychedelic experience is so important.
Dude, you're giving me chills now.
Yeah. Well, and also if you get away from psychedelics, if you don't even want to think about that, but you still want to ponder like why the Bible exists, like I think it's really interesting to study like the humanity aspect of it. Like think about David and Job and how they like cry and fight and question things. And it's perfectly within reason to question like why is there bad? Why is there pain in the world? And it's questions that we still, don't necessarily have answers to, but we still think about those things. Like why do people suffer from depression? Like because for theories, but we still go through these things. I don't know. I don't know.
You're getting into like the psychological territory of the Bible. And Jordan Peterson did a big lecture series on the psychological significance of Genesis.
Mm.
And what you're talking about is right along the lines of that.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I have watched that series I think there's like 13 episodes, like 3 times.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
And that's really, I think, the series that made me look at the Bible differently.
Yeah,
and made me go, oh, there's actually a treasure trove here of real wisdom. Like,
yeah.
I don't know, he made me like understand it differently. That was amazing series.
How do you guys think the simulation theory works with UFO spottings?
Yeah, I actually have thoughts on that.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, were you guys, did you happen to read that article I sent you guys over Instagram? I think it was yesterday.
No, I have not gotten to it
today.
No, I didn't get a chance to see that either. 1,500
more pages of documents produced by the Pentagon in response to a FOIA request from the Sun.
Oh, no way.
And just some wild shit. Like, a entire intelligence agency was formed for like a dozen years or something. And this agency 100% was checking out people who had abduction stories, including people who had radiation burns and as wild shit as unaccounted for pregnancies.
Wow.
Oh, that's what I had a question on. What did I mean? I didn't read the article, so the answer is probably in the article, and I'm sorry. But what do they mean by unaccounted for pregnancies?
I don't really know. I was kind of interested in that myself, and they like the detail, except that these agents were investigating these kinds of matters.
That sounds like some bullshit.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
You have somebody come forward and they're like, "Yeah, I'm pregnant, but I have no idea." It's like, no, you know, you know.
Yeah.
Trying to act like it was a UFO right now. Get out of here.
I see what you're saying, and that's definitely not out of the picture. That's completely
No, but that's a valid question. That's actually what I was thinking too. Like, okay, what does unaccounted for? Like, oh, I'm pregnant, but how? Or is it like
unaccounted for virgin births?
Yeah, like what I need answers.
Right. And unfortunately, I was not given any.
I am going to look at that article though, because anytime there's like a huge release of documents, I think that is fascinating.
Yeah.
And it's never quite in the news.
No, they gloss right over it.
Yeah, like it's in the news. It's there for you to find if you look for it, but like it's not like the first page news that when you open up your like iPhone in the morning. Like
now, let me ask: is that a part of the simulation? That like now, okay, so we've discovered the simulators, and we just can't focus on them. We're just too distracted by the simulation that they've set up for us to really like do anything in response to discovering them.
Or there's not enough like evidence for us to be like, oh yeah, that's a real thing. Like,
I don't think we would have the capacity to see the simulators in any kind of way. And what I mean by that, I don't mean to be weird or technical, but like on a computer, if you're working on the computer and you have a hard drive problem, you cannot fix that problem logged into the computer. You have to go outside of the computer and log in from some external source to be able to work on the hard drive.
Oh, what you're saying. Okay.
So it's almost like if we're in the simulation, there's no capacity for us to access the outside because we would have to be outside.
Right. So this plays into, I think we're probably about to say the same thing here. So my thought is the simulators are the aliens and the UFO. This is such stoner sounding shit, but the simulators are the aliens, right? And maybe they're not from outer space, but from a different dimension, the dimension where the simulators run the simulation. And maybe they just break entry into the simulation once in a while to tweak. You know, they might abduct somebody, stick something up their butt, put them back where they belong, and then drive off, you know?
Yeah. My
So
question
ridiculous.
is, Josh, you know about sandboxes, right? On computers?
Yes.
Okay. All right. This is also probably a stoner thought, even though I'm not a stoner. All right. From a biblical standpoint, all right, I'm going to paint a picture. God creates the world, right? He creates a good. Sin enters the world.
Okay.
And what does he do to keep sin encapsulated away from, say, heaven? It's another part of like the simulation, I guess, or maybe outside, external. And so what if he encapsulates us in a sandbox? And sin can, just like so like you open up, like the reason you'd have a sandbox is, say you get an email and you're not quite sure if it's spam or not, and you want to play with that link. So you would put that link into your sandbox, and then you could open it up from there.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't cause any harm to your computer. In theory, if I understand sandboxes well, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Josh. But what do you guys think about that?
I think you're right.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
It's, in my opinion, like, this is getting into some of my like spiritual beliefs, but I think that if you commit some of these archetypal sins, like the 10 sins or whatever, 10 commandments, then you sort of, like you're saying, you get sandboxed. And it's almost like you're still experiencing humanity with the rest of humanity, but in your own little sandbox now, because you've done this thing. It's this consequence. And I'm not
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, painting a picture, like God creates this like version of code, right? And then the code goes bad. So he moves the code over into a sandbox until he can tweak it right and bring it back online. That's, I guess, where I was going with that.
Weird. Okay.
So no, I see what you're saying. So God places us into this sandbox dimension, if you will,
because now it's corrupted. The file is corrupted.
Right. So basically, what you're saying, the simulation is the sandbox.
Well, maybe the simulation is now inside of the sandbox, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay.
You moved it to the sand. I don't know where I'm going with that.
Yeah, because it's corrupt. So no, that makes sense. Like, if it was corrupt, it would have to be contained. And now we're in that contained space, but there's a perfect reality.
Yeah, outside of that.
Right.
And okay, here's another layer. Jesus enters the picture. He sends Jesus in to start uncorrupting the files, right?
Okay.
And then slowly over time, people start to choose, not saying that we live in an era where like everyone's choosing right now or whatever, but say like other files grow off of like, or I guess we start assimilating to like the correct version of the file. And at some point we'll be able to leave the sandbox because it's been corrected.
Holy shit.
Is that an idea?
Well, so it's almost like then that the Mandela effect is us moving away from a corrupt system. And every time it's like, it used to be the Berenstain Bears. It's like, that was the corrupt version.
Yeah,
we're
but
closer
now...
to
the perfect reality toward utopia.
We're moving to outside of the sandbox. That's the end goal.
All right. So a Gnostic, if you will, that I was listening to recently had a theory from the book of Daniel that's actually just the opposite.
Okay, all right.
So, so speaking of the book of Daniel, I'll try to remember all this, but like my mind was blown listening to this guy. So, did you guys realize in the beginning of the book of Daniel, it talks about how Daniel came from his Israeli tribe into the kingdom of Babylon, and like made friends with the king and whatnot. So the king went to tribes of Israel and just handpicked, or had his men handpick young people that were just going to be in his court. And they were trained by the magicians of the Chaldeans. And the Chaldeans are like the magi. These are the astrologers the people who were the most connected to like the magic that's talked about in the Book of Enoch. That's these people. They're like from, Babylon and Sumeria, like as old as it gets. And so I don't know why this always just blew right past me, but Daniel becomes chief of magi.
Yep.
He becomes what was his they gave him a wizard name. What was his? You can look it up, but like it's a crazy name with a bunch of Z's in it.
Wow. Okay, I'm gonna have to look this up.
Yeah.
Anyway,
right now.
so the dream that he winds up interpreting for King Nebuchadnezzar. So first he had to tell the king what the dream was, and it was a dream of a statue, a huge, glorious statue. The head was made of pure gold, the chest was silver, and then like the waist was bronze, and then it goes down to iron legs, and the feet were made of clay. And what Daniel tells King Nebuchadnezzar is, you are the head of gold. The king, or the kingdom of Babylon here is the gold. The kingdoms that come after progressively get lower. So the next kingdom that comes in, I forget what it was, whether it was the Romans, I forget. They are the silver, the next kingdom that takes over. And it's getting further and further away from the purity of the magic that was taught by the original, angels that, again, are talked about in the Book of Enoch, the original magic. With each eon that I was texting you guys about, that happens roughly every 2,500 years, every new equinox, we're moving further and further away from the original magic. We're becoming less pure.
I know that message that you
was just like, what?
I honestly believe that wholeheartedly. That 2,500 year concept and calendar thing, that is another thing that I actually believe wholeheartedly for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
I think it's.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Josh.
Oh, I just was gonna say I think it's real. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say, within the realm of the Book of Enoch, though, those angels were fallen, so they were teaching humans corrupt things, like they taught them like war and that kind of thing. Isn't that?
Well,
wouldn't we be getting away from the bad almost?
That's a good point. I guess I haven't really thought about it that way. Yeah,
like it doesn't make sense in a way from getting away from the gold. Like obviously we'd want to be closest to the gold, but like I don't know. It's just like it's not angelic beings that are like of good rapport.
Yeah, you should have debated this Gnostic. I wonder what he would have responded with.
As I talk with goop in my mouth, on my mind.
I have yet to actually pull out my Old Testament and read the story. Maybe he was just kind of assigning his own interpretation to it, but because I think the way most people read that, if I remember as a kid, like when I remember that story, but I think I just remember it being taught to me that meant like each kingdom was just going to be less glorious, like in its wealth and riches or something.
Interesting. I've never heard that point. I honestly can't remember the interpretations I grew up with surrounding like that specific
It'd be
story.
best if we could just read the text and I don't know, just see kind of how it hits you when you read it. But
yeah, I had another thought, but it's gone. Another notion.
Another notion, but
gone.
I do find it fascinating. Daniel being chief of the.
Yeah. But here's a thing as well, like
his name is Belshazzar.
Ah, yes.
Yes.
No,
it is
I'm
interesting.
Sorry. No, that was another king he served. What was his name? Sorry, I'm trying to find his. Okay. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, it's just interesting because Daniel does ascend in power in Babylon, but he remains true to his God, and that's kind of interesting as well. Like the source of his power, where was it? It's just kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah.
Oh, also, that was my thought. Okay, guys, I'm sorry to keep sending up biblical, but I feel like the simulation theory just fits really well with the story arc of the Bible.
I think it
does. It does.
Okay, Enoch, doesn't he go away without dying? Elijah and Elisha, don't they? No, Elisha I think dies. Elijah and Enoch are two people.
They're just taken up by God. Yeah.
Yeah. Would that be interesting to think about, of them leaving the simulation? They're essentially escaping the sandbox.
Ooh.
I would imagine them as not actually, look, I don't want to diminish their humanity, and I don't mean to be blasphemous or whatever, but I would imagine them in that case as not even being real humans. Like they were just figures that God created into existence, and once they were done, he was like out of existence, and they just went out.
I see.
Interesting.
Or like maybe they were angels. I don't know.
Possibly, yeah. I don't know. It's just interesting to think, like, here we have two people who never died, and then if you go into the New Testament, here's Jesus who does die, but he comes back into the sandbox.
I do like a modern look at some of these Bible stories, because I think that a lot of them have been really thrown into the mud, and so I think it's cool that we're taking a look at like how the simulation theory and some of these stories actually correlate. We're going to be giving Wendigoon a run for his money on his Sunday church services.
Dude, I love Wendigoon. He's great. He's fantastic.
I agree.
Okay, so I don't know, Josh, do you have any more thoughts on the simulation theory? I mean, this is kind of like your...
Well, I mean, so with the simulation theory, there's a lot of videos that I've watched where I would just say, like, if this is a topic that you're interested in, I'll do my best to link as many of the interesting kind of topics that I can that I've looked into the description, and like check those videos out. And if you think like, wow, I had a question about this one or a thought about that one, throw it in the comments. But otherwise, it's just such a complex topic that I wanted to just talk about different ideas and see what you guys thought. But really, if anybody is listening and they're like, oh man, this is something I'm super interested in, I would just say like follow up on the links, because they get a lot more in depth with some of these concepts in a technical way. I think that's easier to follow.
And I also noticed, guys, if you're interested, Josh has recreated, or he's built a new website for the Notion Club podcast, and it's phenomenal.
Thank you.
But I noticed recently, when you go into episodes, at least on the recent one, the Bigfoot one, you can actually message us directly with thoughts. So if you guys have any ideas or notions that you'd like to kind of bring to the table, like you can directly do that through the website, and we can chat through there, or maybe talk about it and feature on an episode. So that's a really cool feature. I've been wanting to tell you, like, Josh, that's amazing. I love that. So
thank you.
If you guys listen on like Apple or Spotify or something like that, versus like YouTube where you can just comment directly, that's another option, is to just go to the website and comment through there if you're like a Spotify or Apple user or something like that. But so two things before we wrap up. I want to go over this Holtz guy again. He is very interesting. He's an American security hacker, entrepreneur, and software engineer.
That's who he is. I know who he is.
Yeah.
Damn it, this guy is amazing.
He's wild too, and
he's the smartest dude I know.
He's fought like Elon Musk. He's had some issues with Sony. He hacked PlayStation 3's system. Actually, he's the first guy to actually hack the iPhone.
He is one of the best hackers that is in the public sphere.
Yeah, he's very interesting. But he was on a show or something where he was talking about, and I wanted to talk about. I wrote down what he said. He said, as an exploration of whether breaking out of a simulated universe means we can meet God. And he says, and then he follows up with, and kill him. It's easy to imagine that things are so much smarter than you, and they could build a cage you wouldn't even recognize. I was just like, whoa. What if we could break out of this universe? And what would that mean? Do you think? So here's my question. Hypothetically, if we are in a simulation and we do happen to break through and we meet the creators of the simulation, do you think that one, we could fight the simulator creators and win? And do you think, here's my follow-up question, do you think that we should end this simulation and it just ends? Or do you think that we should try and replicate it? I mean, we know that there's like this dark side to humanity. Do you think that replicating it would be good? Or do you think like, okay, we've ascended, we know better, like humanity has very dark streaks to it. So like, should we just end it there? What do you guys think about that?
I mean, my knee-jerk reaction would be no, you can't just end it. I think there's I don't know, I think God was telling the truth when he said it was good.
Yeah.
I think even the bad stuff like is good.
Yeah,
I mean,
agree.
I know that's probably an insensitive thing to say, but I think as a whole, like something is better than nothing.
Okay, so Muskego, you would say that if we could break through this hypothetical like simulation, you think that we should continue it on. We wouldn't end it.
Keep it going. Keep it going.
All right, Josh, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think that we could handle being outside of the simulation. To be honest, like I think that the psychedelic experience in any one of them is an experience outside of the simulation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always overwhelming. Like nobody can just be like, oh yeah, I took 10 grams of mushrooms and, like walked my dog or whatever. It was chill, saw. It's like, no, it's overwhelming for everyone and no one can explain it.
That's very true.
Mm.
Well, and what you said a second ago about like, oh, even the bad is good. My takeaway of how I interpret that is like when I did salvia and I came off of it, the immediate feeling that I had was like, okay, I know that there's turmoil in the world. I know that there's like war and people who are homeless and, people who are sick. And I know all of this is around, but being in this reality is good compared to being in all of those other realities.
Yeah.
Which I don't mean to sound belittling. I was actually going through my own probably one of the hardest times I've ever been in my life when I decided to take salvia. So it's not to diminish like the hardship, but the thing is, we were talking earlier about free will, and there's this idea of like, well, if there is free will, then why isn't everyone just killing each other and stealing from each other and all this other stuff? And I saw a meme yesterday that basically said, I don't do bad things because it makes me feel bad. And it's like, I know that that's so simple, but it's true that for most people, we don't go around like, oh yeah, why don't you just go steal and beat people up and like take what you want? And it's like, well, because I don't feel good about that.
Right. We value peace of mind.
Right. So I think that even though there's this law of entropy and like the universe is moving towards chaos and it's falling apart, I also have this belief that there's this simultaneous law of anti-entropy and like we're moving towards something better.
So like the breaking is almost like a tearing away of the veil almost.
Yes. Yeah, that's like the idea of the Hindu goddess Kali, where it's like it's destruction, it's death, but it's through that destruction and death that there's new life and birth and a new experience.
Okay. Speaking of death, this was also something that I saw in, I'm sorry, I know this is another question, but within death, I was seeing scientists say with the simulation theory that when you die, that you progress into another version of a simulation. So like say another dimension. Do you think that's the case with when say a friend dies? Do you think that they are going into a different dimension or a different simulation? Or do you think that that's like, okay, well, the simulation is terminated, like that's the end for them?
I happen to believe in souls, and they are not, they don't expire with our bodies.
They're not finite.
Right.
Okay.
I think that they probably either pass into some different dimension, or if it is among us, it's, I don't know, just hidden somehow. But no, I think that the soul goes on.
Okay, so you would say that if we're talking about simulation, they would essentially either ascend the simulation, they're on the outside now, or they're in a better version of the simulation, or a different simulation altogether.
Yeah, whether it be a different simulation or the same one, but it's just in a different in a different dimension in the dimension, if you will.
Okay.
Capacity
Josh?
somehow.
I agree 100%. I think we're using the terminology simulation because that's a word that we all can understand and sort of like gives us the imagery that we need to have this conversation.
Yeah.
But whether it's a simulation or not, you know, I'm not trying to talk shit about Richard Dawkins, but I was bringing him up earlier, and it's like where he said he was talking to Joe Rogan. Joe was saying like, well, do you think that there's anything after death or whatever? And do you think it's just blacking out? And Richard Dawkins was like, well, don't you think that it's just blacking out? And he wasn't giving an answer, but it's like, look, Richard Dawkins, you only think that you just black out when you die because you've never done psychedelics. And I don't mean to continuously harp on this. Like, I'm not trying to sound obsessive, but the reality is that you almost throw away this notion of like, okay, it just blacks out. It's like, I don't believe that. There's so much more going on. There is something outside of there.
Yeah.
And like with Richard Dawkins, it's like, man, if you weren't afraid of a bad trip, you as an intellectual, it would be so much more interesting to hear you have an experience like that and then say like, okay, well, now do you think that there's something after death? I imagine that even somebody like him would be way more open to that conversation. So yeah, I firmly believe, I'm not trying to say that I know what it is, but I do firmly believe in a continuation in some capacity.
Okay. That's really interesting, guys. I feel like this has been a really good conversation.
Thank you. I love the stuff you guys brought up. You brought up a book that I love thinking about. You two got into a deep ass part of the conversation. I love that. This is a good one.
Yeah, I liked it. All right. So my final question, and we don't have to answer it. Maybe we can leave it for our listeners. Going forward, what does the potential of living in a simulated reality mean for us? And I don't know if you guys want to answer that or if we just want to leave that for our listeners to think about.
I would answer it by saying that for me, as somebody who grew up playing games like Zelda or Final Fantasy or whatever, it's like, or Halo, you want to beat the game, but you want to beat the game. Like if you're playing Halo, you want to beat the game on Legendary. You don't just want to beat the game. You want to beat it, and you want to do it. Stat your character out, get the items, see the map, play the game.
Understand it.
Yeah.
Damn.
So that's my answer.
Yeah, that's a really good answer.
Yeah, I can't like top that. That's a good ending, I think. That's
well, thank you.
Punchline. Boom.
All right, guys. Well, that is our talk on simulated reality, or the idea of it. And let us know what you guys think in the comments. Or like I said earlier, like you can shoot us a direct message from our website, thenotionclub.com, which Josh created so wonderfully for us. It's amazing.
Thank you again for your feedback on that. I really appreciate that.
I love it. It was like finding a little treasure trove. I was like, oh. So yeah, if you guys like it, please like this episode, and we hope to bring you some more in the future.
See ya.
Peace out, bitches.